Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Literature. Today we're going to be concentrating on giving you a framework to answer the poetry questions, specifically power and conflict. This session is here to complement your lessons with your teachers and not to replace them in any way. So in paper 2 you have the poetry comparison question. As with all of the questions apart from unseen, you are being tested on these 3 assessment objectives. So your ability to read and understand the poems, your ability to answer an essay question on them, and then your ability to analyse writers' techniques and intentions, and to bring in any external information about when the poem was written, what sort of poet it is, and anything else that will affect the meaning. So last time out, we looked at this as a way to structure any response to a poetry question. What that means is that you have your introduction, you then have 4 paragraphs, and then your conclusion. Your first paragraph being about language, so word types, phonetics, semantic field. By semantic field, we mean a group of words that have the same theme or are linked by an idea. You have imagery, so any use of figurative language, so metaphors, similes, personification. None of these are exhaustive lists. Under S, we have structure. So the way that the poem is put together, so you'd be looking at rhyme scheme, narrative voice, use of punctuation, and here you would also include anything about form in a poem. And then lastly, theme. And this paragraph is your opportunity to say anything about the poem you've not yet got to say. So these are the big ideas. Now in power and conflict, we're looking at power of man, effect of conflict, power of nature, anything like that, and it gives you the opportunity to use any of the quotations that you've not yet used that you think you want to. Now, as with a lot of the questions, you will be given an extract. In this case, you'll be given one of the poems from the Power and Conflict collection, and then you'll be asked to use this poem and then compare how the power of man is presented in Ozymandias and one other poem. So you will always be given a poem, and then it's up to you to decide from the other 14 which is the best one to compare it to. Now, this is Ozymandias, so we are looking at the power of man. And so the first thing you need to do is look at how the power of man is shown within this poem. Now, the first thing we have is the poem starts in first person, but then the rest of the poem is someone else's story. So you have that distance between the power of man and the story that's being told. You then have the idea of vast and trunkless legs of stone. So that idea that you have legs with no trunk, there is no centre to the power, that power doesn't really exist anymore. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies. So, half hidden and shattered, a mask of power, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things. Again, that idea of lifelessness, that power doesn't exist anymore. The hand that mocked them in the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, look on my works, you mighty in despair. Again, you have that irony there, that what he is asking you to look upon is shattered and broken, and therefore that power no longer exists. Nothing besides remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sounds stretch far away. Now, because we are looking to do this as list, the first thing we're going to look at is what we would talk about in terms of language. Now, you have trunkless, shattered, wreck, decay, and therefore you would look at the semantic field of destruction. Imagery, you have a shattered visage. Visage being a mask, so that suggestion that the power isn't real. Also, the power is shattered, it is broken beyond repair. Structure-wise, this poem is a sonnet. So it is either love of himself from Ozymandias or love of nature from the poet. And the theme is that man's power is not eternal. So, boundless and bare. Or trunkless. So essentially within this poem you have the concept that man's power is not everlasting, and you now need to think of a poem that you could directly compare it to, either that suggests that man's power is everlasting or that man's power is in some way in conflict with or contrast to nature. The most obvious poem to compare it to is London. And if you're looking at London, you have the concept that man is trying to control nature. You have the repetition of the word chartered, which is in contrast to the semantic field of destruction. Imagery, you have mind-forged manacles. That idea that the power is not real and it's only in people's heads. Structure-wise, you have a rigid rhyme scheme to reflect man's attempts to control. And then the big idea sits around the idea of power being corrupt. And so you have blackening church. So all of that, we've unpicked that poem really quickly. We've got our quotations. We've got quotations for both poems. And this is really how you have to approach planning that comparison. You need to know these poems well enough that you can understand which ones go together and which ones you're going to write about. So now that we understand that we're doing that, from that point, what we want to do is write a comparative paragraph, because within those paragraphs, you need to talk about both poems. So in your imagery paragraph, they're both metaphors. They both suggest lost or fake power. And therefore they both suggest man's power is not real or not lasting. So the next session we'll look at how we actually write that paragraph, but essentially that is what you've now got for each of those individual paragraphs, one on language, one on imagery, one on structure, one on theme. And because you know those poems well enough, you can very easily structure a really quick plan for a paragraph. What you should now do is do the same for language, structure and theme. At this point, not writing those paragraphs, but looking at what you would say about those poems in each paragraph.